Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin Daf Yud Zayin. This week's learning is sponsored by Elisheva Gray, with much appreciation to Rabbanit Michelle, Maggie, and all the Hadran teachers and staff, along with the rich abundance of learning resources they provide. And special thanks to the Hadran Zoom family. It is a comfort, a privilege, and a blessing to be part of this wonderful learning community. You're all an inspiration, and I learn from all of you. Today's daf is sponsored in loving memory of Bubby Molly Andelman by her granddaughters. She was a dearly loved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother who is an inspiration to all her descendants, a woman wise in the ways of the world, who taught us the importance of family and tradition. Okay, we're going to get started. Reminder that we're starting our course on Agadah on Sunday, so I hope you're all registered and I hope you all join. We are going to get started with the bottom of Tetzayin Amabet. Sanhedre Gdola Haita. So what we're now talking about, after we started with the whole discussion of what is dealt with in the Sanhedrin of 71, now we're going to talk about how we got to the number 71. And in fact, you might remember there was a machloket in the Mishnah about whether it's 70 or 71. Rabbi Yehuda said it's 70. The question is, what's the basis of their machloket? We're going to start with one pasuk. We're going to say that doesn't really work. We're going to start with the second pasuk, and then we're going to move to a third. Now, the first two pasukim, and this is a section we're going to deal with a lot today, is in Bamidbar chapter 11. In Bamidbar chapter 11, it's in Parsha Ba'alocha when the Jews start complaining in the desert. And then we start all the complaints, and they complain they want meat, and they don't want the man. And then, if you remember, in the middle of that section, after they complain, before, and God brings them the slav, and then they're eating that, it's coming out of their ears. But before the slav comes, in between the complaint and the response, Moshe starts to complain to God and say, this is just too much for me to handle. And then God says, gather 70 people. And that's where we have this source of 70. And then the question is it 70 with Moshe or 70 without Moshe? And then that would be the difference between 70 and 71. So the obvious place to find the psukim would be in that section, and that's where the Gemara is going to start. But in the end, they're going to have to move back to Shmot in the section where Yitro advises Moshe to set up the courts, which is a bit of a strange place to learn it from because there was no sense of a Sanhedrin Gedolah necessarily, and it's really talking about the smaller courts. And then from there, we're just going to say, well, we learn from the smaller courts to the larger courts. So Sanhedrin Gedolah Haita, okay, and that's just a quote from the Mishnah, was Shivim Ve'echad, and the Rabbi Yehuda said 70. My time at the Rabbanan, Da'amrei u'Moshe al Gabehen, right? The rabbis there had said it's 70 of the Shivim ish plus Moshe's with them. So how do we know that Moshe is counted as part of this group and he adds another person? Amar, it says there. So God tells Moshe, gather me 70 people, v'hityatzvu sham imah, and they will stand there with you to judge the people. So that sounds with you. That sounds like you're with them. Imcha va'at ba'adayu. With you, meaning, and you're one of them. But Rabbi Yehuda says, what do you mean? Imach mishum shchina. With you because of the shchina. Rashi explains this in two different ways. Either it means with you, they have to be outside the ohel because the shchina is inside the ohel moed and they have to stand outside with you. Or Rashi explains, they have to be with you because the next pasuk is that I'm going to give Moshe Ruach HaKodesh, and from there it's going to spread to everyone else. And that's really what it means with the Shekhinah. Moshe has to be there so that the Ruach HaKodesh can go through God and then the other people will kind of get the Ruach HaKodesh of God through Moshe. And that's why, because of the Shekhinah. So there's two different ways. Either it's to avoid the Shekhinah or it's for the Shekhinah to be there. But either which way, it means that Itcha doesn't mean they're judging with you. It just means they have to be with you to either avoid the Shekhinah or to get the Shekhinah. The Rabbanan, okay, so now we're back to the rabbis. What are you going to say? Well, after that pasuk, it says, they will, this is where it actually says, God will bring his presence down onto Moshe, right? I'll take the ruach from you, I'll transfer some to them. And they will bear the burden together with you. That sounds like together with you again. Itcha is like imcha. It's a very similar word. One is with an ayin, imcha, and one is aleph, itcha, but they're very similar. Va'at ba'adayu, and you'll be with them, right? Itcha, and you'll be with them. For Rabbi Yehuda says, what do you mean? No, itcha means bidomin lecha. Itcha means they'll be with you, meaning they'll be like you. Meaning when you choose these 70, choose people who are like you. And then it doesn't mean at all what you think it means. So back to the rabbis. What are you going to say then? V'Rabbanan mi v'hakel alecha v'nasu itcha nafka. So now we go, as I told you before, we're going to now switch back to Shmot. And we're going to go back to when Yitro advises Moshe what to do. And he says, they will make it easier for you. V'nasu itcha, they will bear the burden together with you. And there we have to say, V'yafa Sanhedrin Gedolah miSanhedrin Ketana. And then we're going to learn for the Great Sanhedrin, just like Moshe there ruled the people in smaller courts, also Moshe ruled together with the people in the big Sanhedrin. And therefore, from there we learn that Moshe was with them. Again, Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree, but we've found our third pasuk, which seems to be the source for the rabbis. Now that we already got here, we're going to talk about a very famous midrash, a very famous braita, which is going to talk about what happened there with Eldad and Meidad. You might remember that in that section, they gather 70 people, and Eldad and Meidad stay in the camp. They don't go with the rest of them, and they start prophesizing in the camp. And then Yoshua gets upset, and he goes to Moshe and he says, "Kala'im," which the simple reading means put them in jail. Should do something with them to stop them from what they're doing. And Moshe says, the last line of the section, and that's how it ends, Hamikaneatali, are you jealous for me? Mi yitain kol am Hashem nevi'im halavai, the whole nation would be prophets. Ki yitain Hashem ruach alehem, that God would choose to put his ruach, however you define that word, right, his prophecy upon them. And Moshe says, let it be. So now we're going to have to figure out what motivated Eldad and Meidad not to join these 70 people, not to be part of this. And we're going to really darshan this pasuk, v'yisha'aru shnei anashim b'machaneh. The two people stayed in the camp. Okay, v'yisha'aru is the word we want to deal with. What does it mean they stayed in the camp? Yesh omrim b'kalpi nishtayru. Instead of saying yisha'aru, they stayed back. What they mean is they were left out of the kalpi. Now, left out on purpose. They left themselves out, okay? But they were left over from the kalpi, meaning they didn't join in the choosing of lots. Okay, what are we talking about? What lots were there? Well, okay, God said to Moshe, go gather 70 people. It immediately put Moshe into a quandary. Amar Moshe, what am I supposed to do now? If I take 6 from each tribe, how many do I get to? 6 times 12, 72. I'll have 2 extra. If I take 5 from every shevet, I'll be short 10. I'll only have 60. Right? Even though 70 sounds like a nice round number, it's a terrible number for Moshe. Right? If I take 6 from most of the tribes and then from 2, I'll take only 5. We're going to have a huge jealousy on our hands. The tribes that get only 5 are going to complain to me. So the best way to do this is to draw lots. He took 6 from every tribe. He brought 72 little notes. On 70 he wrote zaken. On 2 he left them blank. And everyone, put them all in a box. Amar lahem bo tlu pitkechem. So he says to them, everybody choose, pick your petek. Kol mishalab yedo zaken, amal fakidech shashamayim. Right? Moshe said, this is all going to be an act of God. Whoever picked the ones that can, obviously that's what God wanted. And you were already sanctified from before, from Shamayim, right? Meaning from God. The 2 ended up with the blank ones. Amar, hamakom lo chafetz becha, v'ani ma'aseh lach. And he was trying to protect himself. He says, look, God didn't choose you, so what do you want from me? Okay, there's nothing, you can complain to me, but complaint department is closed. You have no real right to register a complaint. And now we're going to stop the story for a minute. We don't yet get to what happened with Eldad and Meidad. And now we segue into a different section. Okay, the truth is they're never really going to get back to what happened with Eldad and Meidad here, so maybe I'll tell you right now, which is that Eldad and Meidad basically didn't come. Vayisharu b'machaneh, vayishtayru, right? B'kalpi nishtayru. They didn't join the kalpi. Why not? They were embarrassed. They were worried that what if they get the blank ones and it'll be a huge humiliation, and they preferred to just stay out of it. Okay, in the end, They didn't get the blank ones. The blank ones were taken by other people, and the two left were Zakain, and that's why they had the prophecy on them outside where they were in the camp. So that's the story according to the first opinion. Kayotze b'davar ta'umiel. Now the braita continues and says, we'll show you another example of this. This is in the desert. What happened? The bechorim, the firstborns, were supposed to be the ones working in the temple, but they sinned in Chet HaEgel, and therefore they had to replace the firstborns with the Levites. Now, each firstborn, we know we have what's called a pidyon ben. You have to be redeemed with 5 shkalim, every firstborn. But in the time of the desert, they didn't need to do that because they really were just switching places with a Levi. So the Levi kind of redeemed them. So they would be swapped with a Levi and they wouldn't need to pay. The problem is there were 22,000 Levites and there were 22,273 Bechorim, firstborns. So there were 273 that didn't have a Levite to redeem, to switch with. So Moshe also, again, was in a bit of a quandary. Amar Moshe, Ketzad eseh lahem Yisrael. How am I going to take this 5 shkalim from the people who are supposed to pay? Im amar ten li pidyon chavetze. If I say, give me the money and you'll be redeemed, Yomar li kvar pidauni ben Levi. Now this is based on hamotzi mechaver alav haraya, which is, right, we've been learning that for many, many moons, which is the burden of proof is on the person trying to get the money. If Moshe wants to get the money for them, they can all claim, what do you mean? I have a Levite to be opposite me. How they, what we're going to try matching up everyone, right? They'll just say, oh, I already redeemed myself with a Levi. So Massa, but the problem is there aren't enough Levites to go around. We're short 273. I want you to imagine this next part. Me'asa hevi 22 alafim pitkin v'katav alehem ben Levi. So Moshe brings 22,000 little pieces of, paper. I don't know. They didn't have paper in those days, but created lots. 22,000. That's a huge amount to think about creating lots. V'katav alehem ben Levi. And he wrote on them, son of Levi, right? Which means you swapped with a son of Levi. Okay. So if you pick that, right, you'd say, okay, I'm redeemed. Al shloshim v'shivim u'matayim, shlosha v'shivim u'matayim on 273, katav alehem 5 shkalim. And on those he wrote 5 shkalim. So if you got the 5 shkalim petek, you'd have to pay. Bilalam v'netanam b'kalpi, mix them up, put them in the kalpi. Amar lehem tlu pitkechem, mishalav yado ben Levi, amar lo kvar pitacha ben Levi. Right? If you got ben Levi, said you're already redeemed. Mishalav yado 5 shkalim, amar lo ten pidoncha v'tzei. Okay, so that's another similar situation where Moshe used lots in order to distinguish between, right, a community that theoretically they should all be the same, but we have to exclude a few, and how did we do that? And that's a way to do it in a fair manner. That was all the first opinion, that basically Eldad and Meidad decided to avoid this, to avoid potential humiliation. They didn't want to be humiliated that they weren't the ones chosen. Even though in the end they were chosen, but they were worried they wouldn't be. Rabbi Shimon Omer, different explanation. B'machane nishtayru. They were left over in the camp. What does this mean? Well, b'sha'a sha'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, right? Not b'kalpi. It wasn't because of the kalpi they were set aside, but they already just didn't go, okay, for a different reason. B'sha'a sha'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, esfa li 70 ish, amru Eldad and Meidad, ein anu ru'uyim lo'ota gdula. Now, this was seen actually as a positive thing. They said, we don't deserve this greatness. This is humility, okay? Not concern for humiliation, but actually just being humble and saying, who are we to be part of this amazing group of 70 people? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ho'ilu mi'atatem atzmachem, hareinu masif gdula gdulatchem. So God rewarded them. And the fact that they had this extra prophecy that no one else was prophesizing, which we'll see in a minute how we know that. So God said, I will give you something greater. Because you didn't want it, I will give it to you, and I will give it to you even more than to everyone else. Magdu, right, by the way, we're getting all through this Masechet so far, all sorts of hints and allusions to how to be a proper leader, what traits we're looking for, because this is all about the Sanhedrin and people who are leading the people and being judges, and they need to have these character traits. So we're highlighting very important character traits for leaders. So here we're talking about humility again. What did Magdula osif lahem? What did they get that was greater? Shanavim kulam nitnabu pasku, because all the others got prophecy, right? The others that were with Moshe, but they stopped prophesizing. V'heim nitnabu v'lo pasku. And Eldad and Meidad continued to prophesize. How do we know this? We'll see soon in the psukim. Uman v'uan nitnabu. Now we want to know what was the prophecy that they had. Amru, Moshe met, Yoshua machnisi Yisrael la'aretz. So the first one is about the upcoming future, that Moshe is going to die and Yoshua is going to bring the people into the land. Abba Chanin Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Alis Keslav Hemit Nabim. And what they were saying is, Alislav, Alislav. And this explains why it's right in the center of this story. Because they started to say, and here they're prophesying about the present, they were saying the Slav is coming, and basically brought upon the Slav. They said, come, Slav, come. And basically they bring the next pasuk, which is the section right after them, which is the Slav coming. Rav Nachman Amar al iske Gog Magog hayu b'nabiyim. Okay, this is future, way far in the future, which hasn't even happened yet, right? In the future redemption, there's going to be the battle of Gog Magog first, where the Mashiach comes, and that's what he was prophesying. How on earth do we get to Gog Magog? Well, based on a pasuk in Yechezkel chapter 38, Shneamal, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim, Ha'atahu asher dibarti biyamim kadmonim biyad avadai nevi'ei Yisrael. Right? Are you the one who's talking about these days that already I had prophets who prophesied about this? Bayamim ahem shanim. It is a word we're going to come back to. Who prophesied in those days? It sounds like for years. Lahaviot chalehem. Okay, to bring you upon them. This is talking about Gog and Magog. That I already told prophets earlier about the coming of Gog and Magog. Now. Antikle shanim, don't read it as shanim, ela shnayim. This is a tactic the rabbis use when they darshan psukim. Change the vowels and read it as naim. Now, that means my prophets prophesied about this in pair. Okay, there was a pair of prophets who prophesied about this. Ve'ezo hen shnayim nevi'im shenenabu b'perek achad v'acha. Where do you ever have two prophets prophesying about the same thing at the same moment? The only time you have that is Eldad and Meidad. Heve Omer, Eldad and Meidad. And that's how we know, right? That's why we connect it to Gog and Magog. So we have three interpretations. The Maharsha actually connects all three of these two b'machaneh, because they were mitnabim b'machaneh, and the machaneh is either about the camp of Israel, that Moshe is going to die and Yoshua is going to move on. The camp could be, sorry, the camp could be also the Slav. There was a problem in the camp, and the Slav, also it says there, the Slavs by Yasvu, what's the pasuk? They come, itasfu sviv hamachane. Okay, the Slav come and they gather around the camp. And iske Gog and Magog, they say it also could be the machaneh of Gog and Magog. Okay, like the military camp. So either which way, that was a nice connection of how he connects this to psukim. And that's the end of our long braita. That all was one long braita that started from Yisharush Anashim Machaneh. And how do we explain this? Right? Why were they left back? Either they were out of the kalpi because they chose not to go, because they were worried about humiliation, or they were being humble and just stayed back in the camp and didn't want to participate in being part of these 70 people. And then according to that, by the way, they were chosen as 70. It doesn't talk anything about the concern for jealousy or anything else. Moshe chose 70 people and they just didn't show up. Now we're going to go back to parts of this braita and explain them, particularly the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the second one. Amar, kol nevi'im kulam nidabu pasku, vehem nidabu velo pasku. So the line said that all the nevi'im prophesied and stopped, and their prophecy continued. So, and then we said, right, what did their prophecy continue? They prophesied something else, and we have one of three options. We're going to go back to those three options and see which ones make more sense and which ones make less sense. So first they want to explain Minal and Pasku. How do you know the other Nevi'im stopped prophesying and only Eldad and Meidad continued? Well, when it talks about them prophesying, it says Vayinabu v'lo yasafu. Now yasafu means they didn't add, which sounds like they prophesied and stopped. But that word yasaf doesn't always mean that. Kol gadol v'lo yasaf. And when it talks about in Sefer Dvarim, where Moshe recounts the Matan Torah at Har Sinai, he says that there was a kol gadol of God, v'lo yasaf. Now, lo yasaf doesn't mean it didn't continue. What? Hachinami d'lo sifu? What? The kol of God never, that was the end of it? It ended at that point? No one ever heard the voice of God after that? It can't mean that. Ela de lo pasaku. It actually means it didn't stop. Lo yasif means it continued. So vayinabu v'lo yasafu would be more like they continued. So you can't prove it from there. Ela hachaktiv vayitnabu and hatam ktiv mitnabim. When it talks about the other prophets, it says they prophesied. And when it talked about Eldad and Meidad, it says they are presently prophesying. So that means they continued as opposed to the others who stopped. Adayim mitnabim v'holchim. They continued to prophesy. Now we're going to go back to those three different opinions about what their prophecy was. And like I said, we're going to say some seem to make more sense and others don't, using a bishlama structure, which is this makes sense and this makes sense, but one of them doesn't, but we'll resolve the other one as well. So we're going to have a few of these. Bishlama lamanda amar Moshe met. If you say that what they were prophesying was that Moshe dies, hainu dichtiv adoni Moshe klaim. That's why Yeshua wants to punish them. Ella, because he didn't like that they were right. It was humiliating to Moshe to say, oh, Moshe's going to die, as if like Moshe's going to die, Yeshua's going to take over, even though I guess everyone probably figured that was going to happen, but it wasn't respectful to Moshe to say that. Ella, Lamanda, Amar Hanaptarte, but the other ones, if you say they prophesied this other prophecy about Gog and Magog or about the Slav coming, so Maya Doni Moshe Klaim, what's the problem with that? Well, we're going to see a problem, and this goes back to something we've seen before in our Masechet. Again, they shouldn't have said it if Moshe was there. They should have left it for Moshe. Okay, this is right, that whole thing. You shouldn't be teaching a halacha, and here it's prophecy. Okay, even though prophecy is very different than halacha, but you would say it's the same idea. Lack of respect for Moshe, who was there, and he should have been the one to say it. Again, we're going to say those other two make more sense. Now we're going to talk about the other two make more sense, not the Moshe one. But if you say when Moshe in the end defends them, right, and he says, right, I didn't skip something, right? No. If they really humiliated Moshe, then when Yeshua complains to Moshe and says you should do something about this, and Moshe says leave it be, why would he leave it be if they really were disrespecting him? Well, lo simu akame. Yeshua came and told Moshe this is what's going on, but he didn't say what they said. He just said they're prophesying, but didn't say what they were prophesying about, and therefore Moshe didn't know what they were saying, and therefore he didn't think it was a big deal to, leave it be. Now they're going to say my claim. Now, even though the simple reading is put them away in jail, like kele. What is kilaim? Amar lo, there's a great line. Hatel alehem tzarchet tzibur vehem kalime alehem. Put upon them the burden of the community, meaning make them do a public job, and kilaim usually means they'll self-destruct, basically. Okay, anyone who goes to do a public role, right, is going to struggle very much so, and it'll bring to their fall. They'll again, whether it means they'll be killed. So Rashi, Tosfot doesn't understand it that way. Tosfot explains it, still the same idea, but in a little bit different. Perush nivuatam kale. It will stop them from prophesying. Why will it stop them from prophesying? This is also kind of funny. The only way you can get prophecy is if you're happy and not if you're sad or upset. And as we all know, public roles could create a lot of stress, a lot of being upset. People complain to you about all sorts of decisions you make, and it's not and again, getting back to Sanhedrin, I'm sure the judges got a lot of this, and, it caused a lot of distress. Anyone in public position will understand this, and therefore they won't get prophecy. It doesn't mean you're going to get destroyed, right? But it is a little bit of a hazard. Certainly if you want to be a prophet and a public person, you're going to have some issues because your prophecy won't come to you too often. Okay, and again, we're talking in Sanhedrin, so I think they wanted you to understand the complexities of being in the Sanhedrin. Okay. That's the end of that whole section. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. So again, what we did so far, we talked about the Sanhedrin Agdolah was 71 or 70. We get it from the Shivim Ish. Once we're talking about the Shivim Ish, we get off on a tangent to Eldad and Meidad, and the two approaches, which really one is saying it was kind of bad that they didn't want to join because they were worried about being humiliated. The second one was a more positive one, and that's why they got extra prophecy. Minayin lavi od shlosha. So now we're back to the Mishnah, and we're talking about the 23. The 23, how we get to 23? Because we had Shaftu Eidah, they judged the person. which is they try to lechayev oto, to make him guilty. Then we have v'hitzilu haida. We have another 10 who try to lalechet liskuto, to acquit the person. And then we need a rove of 2. So we add 2 more. That gets us to 22. And then we need an odd number. So we add 1 more. Well, the Gemara says there's a bit of a problem here. If we need a rove of 2, you're never going to have a rove of 2 exactly, because either you're going to have you're going to have 11 versus 12. That's definitely not a rove of 2. And that's only 1. If you're going to have 10 against 13, then it's 3 and not 2. In other words, you don't get to the exact number 2, which is a little bit weird. So the answer, Amar Rabbi Yavau, you could have it in a particular case. You could have it in the case where, now, everyone agrees, this is the divrei hakol. Both the people who disagree about the Sanhedrin Gedolah, how many people it was, 70 or 71, they all agree that it's 23. In a case of 23, you're right, you can't have a majority of exactly 2. But in a case where one of them says, and we're going to get to this case later, one of them says, I don't know, then we remove them from the picture and we add 2 more judges. And in that case, you're going to have an even number. You're going to have 24. And if you have 24, you could have a row of 2. Okay, you could end up with 12, and you could end up with, what was it? 13 and 11, right? And then you could have a majority of 2. So, now, and the Sanhedrin Gdolah, V'aliva de Rabbi Yehuda damar shivim. According to the Sanhedrin Gdolah, you could have it according to Rabbi Yehuda, who has 70. Then you have an even number, because obviously you can only have a majority of 2 if you have an even number. So with 70, you can have a majority of 2. Ve'amar Rabbi Yavau, apropos this comment, Rabbi Yavau also makes another comment about this and says, "B'mosifin osim beitin shakul lechatchila." In the case of mosifin, where one says "Eini yodea," you can knowingly now create a beitin of even number, even though we always say you don't want an even number. In this case, where one is removed because they don't know, then you add 2 more, and in that case, you know, right? So if you start with 23, you drop 1, that's 22, and then you add 2 more, you get to 24. Knowing you're getting to 24, you're allowed to do that, even though we generally say you need an odd number. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, okay, I didn't need you to tell me that. Obviously, if 1 is removed and we add 2, you're going to end up with an even number. Why are you telling us this? We could do simple math. To which they answer, Ma'u detema, you might have thought, Hai tekamer eini yodea kimandi ite dami. You might have thought the one who says, I don't know, isn't removed completely. They're like someone who's still there. They just don't vote anymore, but they could still offer and say, listen, I thought to acquit because of this, and I thought to say they were guilty because of this. And they could be part of the discussion. V'amar milta shaminale. And if he says something, suggest we would listen. Hamash balan, therefore, comes to teach you, no. He's gone. He's out of there completely. It's as if he's not there. And if he gives an answer, we don't listen to him. Amarav Kahana. This is a fascinating line. And we're going to explain it in 2 totally different ways. But first we'll explain it the majority of the way the majority of the commentaries explain. If the Sanhedrin, remember, we're talking about death penalty. If all 23 people want to convict this person and they're unanimous about it, potrimoto, we exempt the person. Crazy halacha, right? You would think all the more so you would kill the person. Why? My timer. There's this law that we learned out from the Torah. We're going to learn in the 5th chapter about halanat hadin. That means if you want to convict someone, you wait another day because you're hoping that maybe someone, right? We don't want to get to a case of capital punishment if we can avoid it. So you want to, especially if we're wrong. So you want to give another day for possibly someone to bring in another good reason to acquit the person. And in this case, if everybody thinks unanimously this person's guilty, then you won't have an opportunity. You can wait another day, but nothing's going to happen. The whole reason for that law is going to be irrelevant because nobody, if everyone agrees, nobody's thinking, oh, maybe we should acquit this person. And since you can't do that law, we basically don't let you convict this person at all. Okay, which is a crazy halacha. The Rosh has a totally opposite explanation. The Rosh said, before we get to the other explanation, what this is basically saying is, as a court, you have a responsibility to try very hard to acquit a person and not give them capital punishment. And if there's no possibility of doing that, then we don't let you kill them. which is very interesting because you would think all the more so they're liable, which is what the Rosh says. The Rosh says potrim oto, which really means exempt them, but it also could mean like we get rid of them quickly, meaning we kill them immediately. We don't do the law. It's the only case where the law of waiting one night isn't relevant because no one's going to try. It's so clear the person's guilty that you kill them immediately. And then it's the complete opposite interpretation, which, sometimes we say, what's the difference, that we explain it this way, we explain it that way. This is a complete, right? Whether we kill a person or exempt a person. It's a huge difference. Thank God we don't have capital punishment anymore, so we don't need to know which one we hold like. I'm a Rabbi Yochanan. Ein moshivim b'Sanhedrin ela ba'alei koma or ba'alei chokhmah. Now we're going to get to who do we have to put in the Sanhedrin? They have to be ba'alei koma, prominent people. They need to be ba'alei chokhmah, wise people. Ba'alei mar'eh, they have to look nice, like distinguished looking, I guess. Ba'alei zikna, elder. They have to be, older, have life experience. Ba'alei kshafim, this is the most fascinating one. They have to know magic. Okay, this is going to sound a little Harry Potter-like. If you look in Rashi gives two explanations. Either they have to lahamit machshafim habotchim bekishvehem linatzel midei beitin. If people come to the court and they have magic powers, then they'll try to use them against the judges. So the judges need to do it for self-defense. That's one. Second explanation in Rashi is ligalot machshafim hamesitim midichim bekishvehem higon mitzrim. This is more that they need to look in the community and see who's a mechashef. This isn't if they come to your court. But the courts are responsible to have proper communities. They have to find out any people who deal with magic and get them out of the community because they're pulling people into bad things. The third interpretation, not in Rashi, but others say is they need to know what is kishuf. In case a case comes before them, if they don't know what magic is, they won't know to identify it. And in order to be able to judge properly, they need to know it. And Yodim Shivim Lashon. The last thing is they need to know 70 languages. We'll see exactly how many people in the court need to do this. Not everyone. Shalote Sanhedrin Shomat Mipiyam Torgamam. We don't want things lost in the translation, as they say, right? So you want to be able to hear things directly and not with a translator. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Ein Moshivim Sanhedrin Elami Shiodea Letaher Et Hasheretz Min HaTorah. This is a very fascinating line. Gefet is all about this with Rabbanit Shimoni. The English is only going to go up after probably on Sunday. But the Hebrew went up last night already. So here's a really interesting thing. Rav says that you can only put someone who knows to make a sheretz pure. A sheretz carries impurity. And if you can bring logic to say, I know why we should be mitaher a sheretz and not have a sheretz create impurity, then you can be a dayan. Now, this is a crazy thing, right? You're proving something against halacha. And so some explain that the idea is that you need to, well, first of all, you can understand this a few ways. Either you need to be able to use logic, right, to kind of break, like the fact that a sheretz is mitame is just a gzerat katuv is what we say. But you could use logic to try to say otherwise, but then understand that the Torah says no. Okay, but you have to be really wise to be able, you could either say you have to be so smart to be able to try to prove a halacha wrong, okay, even though you know that's the halacha. Or maybe also it means that you have to know sometimes you have logic, but there's limitations to it because again, there are gzerot katuv. Okay, Tosan understands it totally differently, which you can listen to Gefet and go into depth into that. We really don't have time, but it's a very interesting topic, what exactly this means. And it's even more interesting because the Gemara continues, and Rav, who said this, now brings a logical argument, and the Gemara is going to reject his logic. So I don't know if that means Rav isn't right. He wasn't right because he really couldn't disprove it. But it's a good question. So we'll leave it open, but definitely delve in depth in Gefet, and you'll hear more about this. So I'm a Rav. I'll give you an example. I can explain it logically. Now, what's usually logic? Kal v'chomer. So now we're on Amud Bet. Uman nachash shemimit umrabet tumat tahol. A nachash that kills, and someone who kills basically creates impurity because a dead person creates a lot of impurity. The dead person's impure. Anyone who comes in contact with the dead person, the house where the dead person is, right? All sorts of things. And yet, the nachash that creates a lot of impurity because it kills is tahor. The nachash does not carry impurity itself. So sheretz she'eno memit umar betuma eno din she'he tahor. So a sheretz which doesn't kill, shretzim are these creatures. They don't really murder people. They don't kill people. and they're not marbet tuma, they don't create a lot of impurity, wouldn't you then say logically, Eino din sheyehi tahor, so shouldn't it be tahor? If the snake is tahor, then the sheret should be tahor. But the Gemara says velo. This isn't actually true because midi dehave akotz ba'alma. If you have a thorn, no one would think a thorn is impure, kind of object that carries impurity, and yet a thorn can kill. So the ability to kill is basically not what creates impurity. So therefore, your logic is irrelevant because it's not the fact that the snake kills that would be a reason to create and to say, one would think that you would be impure if you kill, and therefore they reject this logic. So again, where does that leave us? It's a good question. One of the explanations of why this is here is that this connects very well with what we saw two sections ago, which was right just before we had what the criteria are for dayanim. We said that the Sanhedrin, that all saleh chovah potrim oto, and if we explain it in the usual way, not the way the Rosh does, but that it's very important to always find a way to acquit. And if you can't break certain logic, right, you need to be able to have the capabilities to rethink things and think out of the box. Everyone knows the sheretz is tahor, is mitameh, creates impurity. But you need to try to look at it in the opposite way. You need to be open, right? Be able to think differently, to be able to try to prove something that looks so wrong, but maybe is right. So that's a nice connection that explains this section a little better. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Kol il she'em b'shnayim lidaber ve'echad lishmo. Now we get to the shivim lashon. So Rav says, okay, Rabbi Yehuda quotes Rav, any city, you need a minimum in the city of 2 people who can speak the language, all languages, 70 languages, echad lishmo, one who at least understands them. If you don't have that, minimally, ein moshivim b'sanhedrin. You don't make a Sanhedrin. And then he says, B'Beitar havu shlosha, there were 3, B'Yavna arba'ah, there were 4. Okay, these are examples. Who were the 4? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, V'Shimon hatimni dan lefnei b'karka. There were these 3, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, and there was also Shimon hatimni. He was kind of a lower level rabbi than the others, so he would sit before them on the floor out of respect for them, but he also knew all 70 languages. Now they say Meitive, Shlishit Chochma, Revi'it and Lamala Himenu. Now we said you need 2 who can speak and 1 who can at least understand. But here it sounds like 3 need to speak it, and that would be called a chokhmah. And revi'it, if there's 4 in the city, and lamala himenu, that's even amazing. So that seems to contradict what Rav said, that you really only need 2 to speak. So Huda Amar Ki Tana, he must hold like this other braita, which said, Titanya shniya chokhmah shlishit and lamala himenu, that it's 2 and 3. Okay, 2 is minimum. 3 is even greater, but 2 is enough. As long as 2 people speak all 70 languages, that's sufficient. Okay, now because we mentioned Shimon Atimni, that's at least what most people say this whole section is coming. We have a very strange section. This is like when you have a sheet with formulas. This is like a formula sheet. Okay, we're going to have a sheet that's going to tell us a list. Every time they say the following phrase, they're talking about this rabbi or these rabbis. Okay, and this is like what we usually call klalei Talmud, the rules in the Gemara. Okay, if you want to know when you see this phrase, okay, so remember this stuff. It's Sanhedrin Yud Zayin Amud Bet. And when you see a phrase that you don't know who the rabbis are, you come back to the stuff and you'll know. If you say Limedim Lifnei Chachamim, they learn before the rabbis, it's talking about Levi mi Rebbe. It doesn't mean generally rabbis who learn before other rabbis. It's specifically talking to Levi who learn from Rebbe. Danim Lifnei Chachamim, if you hear the phrase, they ruled before the rabbis, it's referring to Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma, Hanan HaMitzri, Hananya ben Chachinai. Okay, these 4 rabbis. Hanani ben Chachinai is most famous for a story about him that he went to learn, like Rabbi Akiva, left his family for many years. But when he comes back, his wife ends up dying. And there's like a comparison between his story and Rabbi Akiva's story that Rabbi Akiva did in the right way, and he did it kind of in the wrong way. It's a very tragic story. But yet sometimes he's mentioned in a positive way. He's one of these big rabbis. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak matnei chamisha. He had 5 in his list. Okay, instead of Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma, Hanan Mitzri, Hananya, he had all those 4, but he had a 3rd Shimon. Shimon v'Shimon, Hanan v'Hananya. He uses first name only, and he adds another one. Rabotenu shebeBavel, our rabbis in Babylonia, Rav Shmuel. That makes a lot of sense. Rabotenu shebe'eretz Israel, Rabbi Abba. Our rabbis in Israel. Interesting, it's plural, but yet it's only really Rabbi Abba. Dayanei Gola, the Dayanim in the Gola is Karna. You might remember Karna. He's the guy who ends up, he's with Rav and Shmuel Sometimes he gets into a little thing with them. If you remember, both of them have a conversation with him at some point in separate instances, or possibly it was the same story, but attributed once to Rav and once to Shmuel. There were different versions, I guess, of it. But they say, "What's your name?" And then he says, "Karna," and they're not really happy with him. And they say, "You should put you should have a horn grow out of your eyes." And apparently, so it did. Something a little strange about it, but anyway, he does seem to be a respected character despite those stories, and he's called the Dayanim of the Gola of Chutzla, right, which is Babylonia. Dayanei de Eretz Israel, Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. Okay, when you hear that phrase, the Dayanim in Israel, it means Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi. Dayanei de Pumbedita is Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, which is interesting because again, it's plural and it's just one rabbi. Dayanei de Nahardea, Rav Ada Bar Menyume. Okay, the judges in Nahardea is Rav Ada Bar Menyume. Sabe de Surah, the elders of Surah, Rav Huna, Rav Chisda. Sabe de Pumbedita, the elders in Pumbedita, Rav Yehuda for Rav Eno. Okay, you obviously get here some of the geography, who lived where. I mean, I know we're going through this quickly, but you can look back and try to remember who lived where. Harife de Pumbedita, the very sharp people in Pumbedita was Efa and Avimi b'nei Rechava. They were the sons of Rechava. And Morai de Pumbedita, Rabba v'Rav Yosef. And Morai de Nahardea, Rav Chama. Naharbelai matnu, right? If they say in Naharbelai they taught, that means Rami bar Baribi. Amre Bei Rav is Rav Huna. So now the Gemara says, how could Amre Bei Rav be Rav Huna? Ha'amar Rav Huna, Amre Bei Rav. Rav Huna himself said the words Amre Bei Rav, which means he was quoting someone else. So they say, okay, fine, mistake. Ella, it's Ella Rav Hamnuna. You can see why they confused Hamnuna and Huna. Sound very similar. Amre B'Marava, they say in Israel, that's Rabbi Yirmiyah, or famous Rabbi Yirmiyah. Shalchu Mitam, they sent from there, which is also from Israel. That's Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. And Mechanko Ala B'Ma'arava, which is in Israel, they mocked this person, this opinion. Often you have the Israelis mocking the Babylonians' opinions. That's Rabbi Elazar. But they're going to reject these last two and swap them. Hashalchu Mitam, but one time they sent a question from there. It said Shalchu Mitam, and it said L'divrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, which means he can't be the one who sent it if he's saying according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. So Ela Ipuch, so flip it. Shalchu Mitam is Rabbi Elazar, Mechako Ala B'Marav is Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Okay, they switched the last two. Obviously, these are principles, and it could be that sometimes they say, right, it says something and it doesn't necessarily mean it's like this, but they like to kind of, put things into boxes and say, generally, this means that, this person, etc. Okay, moving on. We're now at the end of our chapter, at the very last part of the Mishnah, where we have a debate. How many people need to be in a city for you to set up the courts of 23? And today we're going to talk about the 120 opinion. You need 120 people. Where do we get to 120 people? What are these 120 people doing? Why is it important to have 120 people? Well, you need, if you're going to have 23 judges, you're going to need at least 23 people. So 23 for the Sanhedrin Aktana. Okay, then you're going to have, I just want to check one thing. Right, it could be you need them actually. Right, yeah. It's more that you need 23 at least to be the judges. We're assuming the judges come from within the town. So the first 23 are for the judges themselves. Then you need you need 3 rows of 23 to sit opposite them. These are considered Talmidei Chachamim, come and sit there. This is in case you need to add more people. This is in case you need to ask advice from someone. That gets us up to 92. Okay, where they get that? That's a good question. I don't know if there's a particular source for this, but that's what they say. Next. So that gets you up to 92. So you need, in every city, you need 10 batlanim. That means you need to have 10 people who are basically not doing anything and are always available to make a minyan. Okay, and basically Rashi quotes the Gemara Megillah that says if you don't have that, you're like a kfal, you're not a city. Okay, and therefore if you're not a city, you don't need a Sanhedrin. Hare mea betray. We got to 102. Shnei sofrim. You need 2 sofrim to write things down, what happens in the court. 2 scribes. You need shnei chazanim. These are like messengers of the court. They either bring the subpoenas to people or they give the lashes. Ushnei baalei dinim. You need, well, if you need a court, you're going to need 2 people who come to court with issues. Shnei edim. You're going to need 2 witnesses to testify at least for one side. Shnei zomimim. You have to have a possibility that there could be 2 people who could knock out those witnesses. And shnei zomimim. And possibility that the ones who tried to knock out the first, maybe you're lying also, so you would need them as well. Hare me'avar basar. So that got you up to 114. How you get to the other six is a very big debate. We're going to now learn the other six, but you're going to see there's way more than six here. So some people are going to just bulk a bunch together in different ways. Vitanya, and it says a braita that kol ir she'en ba'asara dvarim halalu ein tamid chacham rashai lador b'tocha. If the city doesn't have these 10 things, the Talmud Chacham can't live in the city, which means basically we're not going to have a Sanhedrin. So, Beitin Makim V'Onshim, you need a court that gives punishments. Kupashal Tzedakah Nigbei B'Shnayim, 2 people who collect charity, U'mitchaleket B'Shlosha, and 3 to divide it. Whether this is altogether 3, because you could have the same collection and dividing the same people, or maybe this is already 5. So it's either 3 or 5 at this point. Beit Knesset, you need a shul, you need a Beit HaMerchatz, a bathing house, a Beit HaKisei, a bathroom, a Rofei v'Uman v'Lablar, and maybe a Tabach, whether you have that in your Girsa or not. So you need an Melamed Tinokot. So these are another 5 people. We're definitely way over 6, but there could be overlap here. So either there's overlap in the tzedakah or there's some overlap here. Either way, there has to be some overlap. A doctor, a bloodletter, a scribe, a butcher, and which is in parentheses, so not clear, and a teacher. Okay, you need all those. So perhaps someone could multitask, and have a few jobs. Mishum Rabbi Akiva Amru Af Mine Pera, you have to have a bunch of different types of fruits or produce. Okay, it's healthy to have that. If you don't have that in a city, right, you shouldn't be a Talmid Chacham living there because you're not going to be able to sustain yourself. And with that, we finished for today. So that gets to us our 120 people. Again, there's different ways to do the count. I'm not going to get into it, but let's just go with simple. If you say 2 and 3 was the beginning, you have 5, then all these people theoretically could be, you could have someone who's a doctor and a bloodletter, and a little hard to imagine how they could do all those things, but we could go with that. Okay, so we started with the judges and the Sanhedrin Gedolah, how we got to 70 and 71, what the debate is based on. From there, we got to Eldad and Meidad. Then we went back to the 23, how you have a majority of 2. Rabbi Abahu gave that one particular case when you're Mosifim. Then we had the court, whether you could convict someone, whether if everyone agrees unanimously, perhaps you can't even convict them. Then we saw what it takes to be a judge, what kind of character traits you have. And again, you can either listen to Geffen, which will go up on Sunday, or you can listen to Hebrew, which is already up. Then we went to the languages, how many people need to know different languages, not the whole court, but at least 2 or 3. And at least one needs to understand. And then we went to that whole list of when the Gemara uses this term, who is it referring to? And we finished with the 120 and how we got to 120 people, why then you need a court of 23. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.